The case we're going to talk about today was so insanely senseless that when the full truth came out, this crime instantly became a national sensation. The plot twists that awaited the detectives couldn't be invented by even the most sophisticated screenwriter, and yet, at first, the story seemed quite ordinary. The story begins in the small town of Port Orchard, a town in Washington state with a population of just 15,000 people. It was here that on the evening of October 15th, 1988, a standard work shift was taking place at the PJ Market store. 30-year-old Cheryl Pitre was clearly bored that evening. There weren't many customers. However, at some point, a college student named Marta de la Cruz entered the store. Cheryl had known her not long ago, but they quickly bonded, and Marta often visited Cheryl at the store in the evenings. The women could chat for hours about anything. Marta told Cheryl about her studies, problems, and just life in general. In a short time, Cheryl became her close friend. She could always listen, give advice, or simply support Marta in difficult situations. Indeed, Cheryl had this influence on many people. She was kind, incredibly sensitive, and also had a good sense of humor. After talking with Cheryl, most people's mood only improved. This time, Marta told Cheryl that she and her boyfriend had found a new apartment. They were moving to another part of town. So now Marta wouldn't be able to visit Cheryl in the evenings as often. At the same time, Marta complained that they had very little money. They didn't even have enough for dishes, furniture, or other basic household items. When Cheryl heard this, first of all, she congratulated Marta on the planned move. In her characteristic way, she encouraged her, said that changes are always good. And in the end, she promised to give Marta some of her things and furniture for an easier start in the new place. Marta was shocked by the woman's kindness, but such behavior was typical for Cheryl. She was a single mother raising a 9-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. Life was not easy for her. She worked 2 jobs, lived in a remote house practically in the woods because that was all she could afford. Basically, Cheryl herself was, if you can say so, poor. But nevertheless, she always tried to help others. And really, I often notice that the less a person has, the more generous they are. In the end, the women agreed that Cheryl would bring the promised furniture tomorrow, and they said goodbye. Moreover, there was simply no opportunity to chat further. Other customers appeared in the store. Cheryl's shift lasted until 11 p.m. When that time came, the woman, as usual, checked the cash register, walked around the store, and finally locked it. She got into her old silver sedan and drove home, knowing that tomorrow, as almost always, she would return to the store at 7 a.m. for opening. Meanwhile, as Cheryl was about to drive home, on the other end of town, her ex-husband, Roland Pitre, was very excited. For him, this was a special night. He had prepared a big surprise for Cheryl, a surprise that, in his opinion, was supposed to help him win her back. They were supposed to be together again. The most important thing for Roland now was to show Cheryl how wrong he had been, how stupid he had been before, how much he needed her, and how much she needed him. He also imagined how happy their daughter would be if her parents reunited. By the way, that weekend the daughter was with Roland, and he could clearly see how upset she was that her parents were not together. The couple had a rather complicated relationship history, but Roland knew for sure that their breakup was entirely his fault. They met 12 years ago. Back then, Roland was a Marine sergeant. He was tall, handsome, charismatic. In a word, the dream guy for many girls. However, despite this, Roland had one serious flaw. He cheated on every girl he dated, and then made up ridiculous excuses for himself. Despite this, Cheryl fell head over heels in love with him. In fact, in her youth, Cheryl was very insecure. She didn't consider herself attractive. So when such a stately man as Roland paid attention to her, she simply lost her head. In the end, the couple got married. They had a daughter, and immediately after that, Roland began cheating on Cheryl in his usual way. This led to divorce. From that moment, Roland's life began to fall apart. The thing was that the woman with whom he cheated on Cheryl was also married. Then, Roland planned to kill his lover's husband, but the murder did not happen. Roland's plan became known to the police, and he was eventually arrested for attempted murder. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Everyone turned away from him. While he was in prison, only one person maintained contact with him, and that was Cheryl. While in prison, the man finally realized that Cheryl was the best thing in his life, and by losing her, he had seriously messed up. He wrote her letters more and more often, letters about how he regretted their breakup, how he was wrong, and how he wanted her back. Cheryl replied that yes, she still loved him. In the end, when Roland was released from prison, he and Cheryl got married again. They had another child, a boy. For some time, they lived quite happily, but soon Roland returned to his old ways. He started cheating on his wife again, which led to their second divorce. However, now, on the night of October 15th and 16th, Roland was once again determined to win Cheryl back. For this, he came up with an entire plan. Roland looked at his watch. It was 11:30 p.m., which meant it was time to put his plan to get Cheryl back into action. However, as soon as he was about to leave the house, he felt terrible malaise. He sat down on the couch and simply lost consciousness. The man had blood pressure problems, and sometimes when he was very worried, he could get dizzy. He could even lose consciousness, as happened that evening. He just passed out until the next morning. The next morning, Marta, to whom Cheryl had promised some furniture items, and other PJ Market customers came to the store and were surprised to find it closed. All these customers knew Cheryl well and knew that she never was late for work. This was completely uncharacteristic of her. Everyone thought that there must be a reasonable explanation for the woman's absence. Maybe something happened in her family. Maybe she got sick. Or finally, maybe her car just broke down. In addition, Cheryl did not come to Roland to pick up their daughter and son after the weekend with their father. Roland did not know that she had missed work. He thought she was just late. But when by 7 p.m. Cheryl still hadn't shown up or called, the man decided to call Cheryl himself. As you've probably already guessed, he got no answer. Over the next few hours, Cheryl still didn't call back. Roland became seriously worried. Where was she? What had happened to her? In the end, Roland reported his ex-wife's disappearance to the police. The police arrived at Cheryl's house but found nothing suspicious. They had a spare key from Roland. Inside, the police listened to the messages on the woman's answering machine. These were quite expected messages from worried relatives and friends of the missing woman. Only one last message stood out. In it, someone said that he had found Cheryl's purse in Lake Union and that he would like to return it to her. Lake Union was about an hour's drive from Cheryl's house. There were no reasons or indications that the woman, and accordingly her purse, could be there. Cheryl's entire life was centered in Port Orchard. Her job, her children, and just her acquaintances were here. There was no logical explanation for how the woman's purse could end up an hour's drive from her home. Nevertheless, this was an important lead. Of course, in search of Cheryl, the police went to Lake Union. The problem was that it was a very busy place. Thousands of people lived near the lake. There were hundreds of cars. Finding Cheryl's unremarkable sedan among them was extremely difficult. But somehow, they managed to do it. On October 19th, 3 days after the disappearance, the car was found in one of the parking lots. It was an alarming find, but not so much as to panic strongly. There was still hope that Cheryl would be found alive. and the woman was indeed found. Breaking into the car's trunk, the police discovered Cheryl. She was dead, and had clearly been brutally beaten before death. Of course, the first suspect was Roland. Firstly, because he was Cheryl's ex-husband, and secondly, as we remember, he already had a conviction for attempted murder. But he had a very strong alibi. Many people confirmed that he was in Port Orchard, far from the lake. In the end, his daughter spent all the time with him. Although she was a child, still. The police believed her. The man fully cooperated with the investigation. Even without a warrant, he allowed the police to inspect and search his house. As you understand, nothing criminal was found there. Roland absolutely could not have abducted Cheryl. However, he did tell the police one important story. According to Roland, recently, Cheryl had shared with him concerns that someone seemed to be watching her. Someone was stalking her. However, after questioning the relatives, colleagues, friends, and just acquaintances of the victim, the police found no confirmation of Roland's words. At this stage, the case became a so-called cold case. It took a year to find a new lead in this story. A journalist contacted the police, telling them that an unknown young guy had called him and confessed to the murder of Cheryl Pitre. The guy did not give his name, just confessed and hung up. It looked like the guy just needed to talk it out, as they say, to get a weight off his chest. The detectives convinced the journalist to write an article about this call. Perhaps it would encourage the killer to come forward again, or lead to some other clue. When this article was published, one of Cheryl's former colleagues, the one who worked with her at the car dealership, that was Cheryl's second job, contacted the detectives. The colleague said that at work there was a guy who had feelings for Cheryl. He admitted that he was an aggressive and creepy guy. His name was Albie Brett Veer. Cheryl was helping this guy with his resume, and during this interaction, Albie developed feelings for her. When the police began searching for him, it turned out that he no longer worked at the car dealership. Moreover, he quit just 2 days before Cheryl's disappearance. And on the day the body was found, someone saw Albie with cuts on his hand. In addition, the detectives learned that Albie's father lived near PJ Market, Cheryl's first workplace, and the guy's mother lived near Lake Union, the place where the car and the victim's body were found. At this stage, Roland's strange story about someone stalking Cheryl before her disappearance took on a quite specific meaning. This stalker could well have been Albie Brett Veer. When the police finally managed to locate him, Albie behaved closed off and did not want to cooperate with the detectives. Of course, all this was damn strange. In the end, they managed to get the guy to talk. Regarding the cut, he said he got it while fishing. The detectives questioned those who were with him that day, and they indeed confirmed it. And overall, despite all the coincidences and oddities concerning this guy and his connection to Cheryl, nothing concrete linking him to the murder was found. In the end, the guy had to be released, and the case was shelved on the farthest shelves of the police archive for many years. Everything changed in 2002, 14 years after Cheryl's murder. One prisoner, in exchange for certain privileges in prison, promised the police to tell who the killer of Cheryl Pitre was. According to the prisoner, it was someone named Frederick McKee. At that time, Frederick was also already in prison on a drug case. It is not known exactly how the prisoner learned of Frederick's involvement in Cheryl's death. However, he and McKee spent some time in the same cell, and perhaps Frederick simply let it slip. In the end, the police took DNA from Frederick McKee and compared it to the DNA found on the duct tape that bound Cheryl's hands, and both samples matched completely. Frederick McKee was indeed the one who killed Cheryl Pitre back then, a full 14 years ago. However, when the police dug a little deeper into this story, They quickly realized that this disgusting crime committed by Frederick McKee was not the worst part of this long, tangled history. The real story of what happened to Cheryl Pitre was so insanely senseless that it immediately became a sensation across the country. First, I'll tell you what actually happened to Cheryl, and then I'll give you a wildly absurd explanation of why it happened. Late in the evening of October 15th, 1988, on the evening of Cheryl's disappearance, Frederick McKee set up an ambush for her. He broke into her house and waited for her return. There, inside her house, after Cheryl entered, he attacked her, hit her on the head several times, bound her, and put her in the trunk of her own car. Cheryl resisted desperately, so the man's blows were strong and harsh, to knock her out as quickly as possible. In the end, he drove Cheryl in the trunk of her own car to Lake Union, abandoned Cheryl's car there on the parking lot, and threw the woman's purse into the lake. However, this terrible night was not supposed to end exactly like that. Here's how it was supposed to happen. At the same time as Cheryl was closing the store and about to drive home, her ex-husband Roland, on the other end of town, was waiting for his moment, anxiously glancing at the clock. He had a plan to win Cheryl back, to make them together again. This plan consisted of saving Cheryl from a staged attack orchestrated by himself, Roland. For this, he hired his friend Frederick McKee. He gave him the key to Cheryl's house so that McKee would wait for the woman there. According to the plan, McKee was supposed to attack Cheryl, and Roland was to suddenly appear and save her from the attack. In Roland's opinion, this was supposed to win back Cheryl's love again. But, as you understand, something in this story went wrong. Namely, when Roland was about to set off to save Cheryl, he was so excited that his blood pressure spiked sharply. He simply lost consciousness and came to only the next morning. Meanwhile, McKee, as he and Roland had agreed, attacked Cheryl. He expected Roland to appear. He waited for him a long time at Cheryl's house, but then, in the end, realizing that Roland was not getting in touch and that staying at Cheryl's house was dangerous, he decided to drive her to the parking lot at Lake Union. He thought, let Roland deal with this situation himself now. When Roland came to the next morning, the first thing he did was call McKee. He told him that he had waited a long time for him at Cheryl's house, and not waiting, drove her in her own car in the trunk to Lake Union. Roland immediately rushed to the indicated place, but only upon finding the car and opening the trunk did the man realize that Cheryl was dead. Either McKee overdid it during the attack, or she simply suffocated, spending the night in the trunk with her mouth taped. By the time the police learned all this, Roland was already in prison, and the reason probably won't surprise you. He tried to kidnap a child of another of his ex-wives, to then save him and impress the woman. A situation similar to the one with Cheryl, but fortunately, then, unlike the case with Cheryl, no one died. In the end, both Roland Pitre and Frederick McKee were sentenced to prison terms for participation in the kidnapping and murder of Cheryl Pitre. This story is a vivid and sad example of how one person's selfish, infantile obsession can lead to a completely senseless and irreparable tragedy.